Jack the Ripper, the mysterious serial killer whose identity has long remained a mystery.
That is.
Until now.
Yeah. DNA from a shawl recovered at the scene of one of his crimes has incredibly found a 100% match.
For more than a century, the shadow of Jack the Ripper has loomed over history as one of the most chilling and baffling mysteries ever recorded. In the autumn of 1888, a series of horrific murders transformed a forgotten corner of London into the center of worldwide attention. Newspapers called him a monster. Police called him a ghost. Historians called him history's greatest unsolved serial killer. For generations, countless theories have pointed to doctors, butchers, artists, members of the royal family, and even complete strangers. Yet no one could ever prove who Jack the Ripper really was. That mystery survived wars, revolutions, and the birth of modern forensic science. Before we go any further, if you enjoy well-researched documentaries about history's greatest mysteries, make sure to subscribe to the channel and help us reach our goal of 5,000 subscribers. But today, more than 137 years later, new forensic evidence and modern DNA analysis have brought investigators closer than ever before to answering the question that has haunted history for over a century. Whether this evidence finally closes the case remains a matter of debate, but it has fundamentally changed the conversation. This is the story of Jack the Ripper and the extraordinary evidence that may finally reveal the man behind the legend. Before we examine that remarkable discovery, we must travel back to Victorian London, because the answer to this mystery begins in one of the darkest and poorest places in the British Empire. In the late 19th century, Whitechapel was unlike the London seen in royal portraits and grand architecture. Hidden in the city's East End was a maze of cramped alleyways, smoke-filled streets, overcrowded lodging houses, and decaying tenements where thousands struggled simply to survive. Poverty was everywhere. Families shared single rooms. Disease spread through filthy streets. Crime flourished in the darkness. And many who lived there had nowhere else to go. Waves of immigrants escaping persecution had arrived seeking safety, only to find themselves trapped in desperate conditions with little work and even less hope. To outsiders, Whitechapel represented everything Victorian society wished to ignore. Yet, to those living there, hardship was simply everyday life. Women often turned to casual labor or prostitution just to afford a bed for the night. Police patrols were stretched thin, public trust in authority was almost non-existent, and after sunset, the district became a place where people disappeared into the darkness without anyone asking questions. It was within this environment that one unknown killer found the perfect hunting ground. Then, during the autumn of 1888, the nightmare began. On the morning of 31st August, the body of Marianne Nichols was discovered in Bucks Row. Just over a week later came Annie Chapman. Then, on the night of 30th September, Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were murdered within less than an hour of each other. Finally, on November 9th, Mary Jane Kelly was found brutally murdered inside her tiny room at Miller's Court. 5 women, 5 horrific crime scenes, barely 10 weeks. The violence escalated with almost every attack, leaving behind injuries so savage that even experienced police officers struggled to describe what they had witnessed. Investigators quickly noticed disturbing similarities between the murders. The victims were all vulnerable women living in extreme poverty. Each attack appeared carefully planned. The killer struck quickly, vanished without being seen, and left behind mutilations so precise that many believed he possessed knowledge of human anatomy. Whether he truly had medical training has remained one of history's longest-running debates, but at the time, the injuries seemed too deliberate to be random acts of violence. As fear spread through Whitechapel, so too did the belief that a single predator was stalking London's streets. Within weeks, newspapers transformed the investigation into an international spectacle. Every new murder dominated the front pages. Anonymous letters claiming to be from the killer appeared in newspaper offices, including one signed with a name the world had never heard before, Jack the Ripper. Although historians now believe many of those letters were hoaxes, the nickname endured, turning an unknown murderer into one of history's most infamous legends. Public panic intensified. Rumors spread through every corner of London. Some believed the killer was a respected surgeon. Others accused local butchers, foreign immigrants, wealthy gentlemen, or even members of the British royal family. With each passing week, the mystery only grew larger. The police launched one of the largest murder investigations Britain had ever seen, yet they faced enormous obstacles. Modern forensic science did not exist. Fingerprints were not yet routinely used. DNA testing was unimaginable. Crime scenes were often crowded with curious onlookers before investigators even arrived, destroying valuable evidence. Witnesses offered contradictory descriptions, and the confusing maze of Whitechapel's narrow streets allowed the killer to disappear almost instantly after every attack. Despite hundreds of interviews, house-to-house searches, and countless suspects, every promising lead eventually collapsed. As the murders stopped as suddenly as they had begun, the investigation slowly faded, but the mystery refused to die. Over the decades, historians, detectives, criminologists, and amateur investigators proposed dozens of suspects. Some theories blamed famous artists, others accused doctors or butchers. Still others suggested elaborate conspiracies involving powerful political figures. Books, documentaries, films, and television series kept the mystery alive, ensuring that Jack the Ripper became more than a criminal. He became a symbol of history's greatest unsolved case. Lost beneath that legend, however, were the real victims. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly were not simply names in police files. They were women who had endured poverty, hardship, and social neglect long before they encountered their killer. Their lives reflected the harsh reality of Victorian London, where survival itself was often a daily struggle. For generations, the fascination surrounding Jack the Ripper overshadowed the stories of the women whose lives were stolen. Yet understanding who they were is essential to understanding the crime itself. Their murders also revealed important clues about the killer. He appeared to select vulnerable women who were alone late at night. He operated within a remarkably small area of Whitechapel, suggesting that he knew the neighborhood intimately. He struck with extraordinary speed, vanished before police could respond, and left behind injuries that seemed to follow a recognizable pattern. Every new crime painted a clearer picture of his methods, yet none revealed his identity. The more investigators learned about how he killed, the less they understood about who he actually was. For well over a century, those clues remained frozen in time. Historians could analyze witness statements, detectives could revisit police records, experts could debate the medical evidence, but without modern forensic science, the case seemed destined to remain unsolved forever. Then everything changed. More than 100 years after the murders, advances in DNA technology allowed researchers to re-examine evidence that Victorian investigators could never have imagined analyzing. A single historical artifact, preserved for generations, would become the center of one of the most controversial forensic investigations ever conducted. Supporters hailed it as the breakthrough that finally identified Jack the Ripper. Critics argued that the evidence remained far from conclusive. Regardless of where the truth ultimately lies, the emergence of modern genetic testing has transformed this famous mystery from one built entirely on speculation into one supported by scientific evidence, that can finally be examined, challenged, and debated. Modus operandi of the killer. As investigators pieced together the horrifying crime scenes, a disturbing pattern slowly began to emerge. Although the victims came from different backgrounds and lived in different lodging houses, the killer's methods were strikingly consistent. He did not attack randomly or act in fits of uncontrollable rage. Instead, every crime suggested patience, calculation, and remarkable self-control. Whoever Jack the Ripper was, he understood Whitechapel better than the police ever could. He knew which streets emptied after midnight, which alleys offered the deepest shadows, and exactly how long he had before someone might stumble across the scene. Rather than fleeing London after each murder, he appeared completely comfortable operating within the same small network of streets, almost as though the district itself was protecting him. His choice of victims was equally deliberate. The women he targeted were among the most vulnerable members of Victorian society. Living in extreme poverty, many relied on prostitution simply to earn enough money for food or a bed in a common lodging house. They often wandered the streets late at night, searching for clients in isolated areas where few respectable citizens ventured after dark. To the killer, these women represented easy opportunities. They were accustomed to speaking with strangers, making it far easier for him to approach without raising suspicion. He likely presented himself as calm, polite, and ordinary, someone who blended effortlessly into the crowds. There was probably nothing outwardly threatening about his appearance, allowing him to gain the victim's trust long enough to lead them into a quiet courtyard or deserted alley before striking with terrifying speed. What happened next unfolded with chilling efficiency. Modern criminal profilers believe the killer exercised extraordinary patience, sometimes observing potential victims before deciding whether the circumstances were right. He appears to have waited until the streets were empty, ensuring there were no nearby witnesses before launching his attack. The murders themselves were carried out rapidly, suggesting both confidence and preparation. In several cases, only minutes separated the estimated time of death from the discovery of the bodies, indicating that the killer completed his attacks and disappeared almost immediately afterward. This remarkable timing made it incredibly difficult for police patrols to intercept him, even after security in Whitechapel had been significantly increased. One murder, however, stands apart from the others. On the night of September 30th, 1888, Elizabeth Stride was killed in Dutfield's yard. Yet, unlike the other canonical victims, her body displayed none of the extensive mutilations normally associated with Jack the Ripper. Many investigators have long believed this attack was interrupted, perhaps by the arrival of a passerby or a nearby resident. If that theory is correct, it reveals something important about the killer. Rather than taking unnecessary risks, he abandoned the scene the moment he believed he might be discovered. Just 45 minutes later, Catherine Eddowes was murdered less than a mile away in Mitre Square. Her body bore some of the most horrific injuries of the entire series, leading many historians to believe the killer sought another victim almost immediately to complete what had been interrupted earlier that evening. The geography of Whitechapel also appears to have been one of the killer's greatest weapons. The district was a maze of twisting alleyways, narrow courts, cramped passages, and interconnected streets that few outsiders truly understood. After each murder, he seemed to vanish into this labyrinth before officers could seal the area. Even when police arrived within minutes, there was no sign of the murderer. This repeated success strongly suggests he had an intimate knowledge of the neighborhood. Whether he lived there, worked there, or spent significant time walking its streets remains unknown, but his movements reveal someone who knew exactly where to disappear when danger approached. Perhaps even more revealing is the remarkable consistency of the crime locations. Every one of the 5 canonical murders occurred within a relatively small section of Whitechapel and the surrounding streets. This was not the behavior of a killer wandering aimlessly across London. Instead, he confined himself to a compact territory where he appeared completely confident. Criminal psychologists often refer to this as a comfort zone, a familiar environment where an offender feels secure enough to take calculated risks while maintaining a clear escape route. The fact that the murders remained concentrated within such a small geographical area has become one of the strongest behavioral clues in the entire investigation. Researchers have also noticed intriguing patterns in the timing of the attacks. Several occurred during weekends or near the end of the month, prompting speculation that the killer may have followed a routine connected to employment or personal obligations. While no theory has ever been proven, these recurring intervals suggest that his crimes may not have been entirely impulsive. Instead, they may have been planned around periods when he knew he could move through Whitechapel without attracting attention. Equally striking is the emotional control he demonstrated. Despite the extreme violence inflicted upon the victims, he consistently escaped without leaving behind obvious evidence. No weapon was ever recovered. No blood-stained clothing was traced back to a suspect. No eyewitness ever positively identified him leaving a crime scene. For a murderer operating in one of the busiest districts of London, this level of discipline was extraordinary. The injuries themselves became another source of endless debate. The mutilations appeared deliberate rather than random, leading many investigators to suspect that the killer possessed at least some familiarity with human anatomy. Whether this knowledge came from medical training, butchery, slaughterhouse work, or practical experience has never been conclusively established. Yet, the precision of certain injuries fueled speculation for generations. Some experts even argued that the removal of organs such as the uterus or kidney reflected a ritualistic signature rather than simple brutality. Others believed the mutilations were expressions of overwhelming psychological rage, directed specifically at vulnerable women. Whatever the motive, the violence extended far beyond murder. It appeared intended to shock, degrade, and terrify, ensuring that each new crime generated even greater fear than the last. As the body count grew, panic spread across London. Every morning, newspapers published horrifying new details, while rumors traveled faster than facts. Streets emptied after dark. Vigilance committees formed throughout Whitechapel, and ordinary citizens began patrolling their own neighborhoods in the hope of catching the elusive killer. The Metropolitan Police, led by Chief Inspector Frederick Aberline, intensified their investigation, interviewing hundreds of witnesses and pursuing countless leads. Yet despite their determination, the killer always seemed one step ahead. Every clue dissolved into uncertainty. Every suspect lacked definitive proof, and every promising lead ended in frustration. By the close of 1888, the investigation had reached a standstill. The murders had apparently stopped, but the identity of Jack the Ripper remained as mysterious as ever. Then came an even greater challenge. As public fear slowly gave way to endless speculation, investigators found themselves overwhelmed by rumors, contradictory witness statements, anonymous letters, and an ever-growing list of suspects. The question was no longer simply how the killer committed his crimes. It was whether the police had ever been close to catching him at all. So, what exactly did the investigators discover during their original investigation? And why did every lead ultimately fail? Initial investigation and challenges. As fears spread through Whitechapel, the Metropolitan Police launched one of the largest murder investigations Victorian Britain had ever seen. Hundreds of officers flooded the streets. Detectives interviewed countless witnesses, searched lodging houses, questioned local residents, and followed every rumor that reached Scotland Yard. Yet, from the very beginning, the investigation was plagued by problems that investigators could neither predict nor overcome. Unlike modern homicide investigations, where evidence is shared instantly between agencies, the Jack the Ripper case crossed the boundaries of two separate police forces. Most of the murders fell under the jurisdiction of the Metropolitan Police, while Catherine Eddowes was murdered in Mitre Square, an area controlled by the City of London Police. That seemingly simple jurisdictional divide created communication delays, duplicated efforts, and occasional disagreements over investigative priorities. Valuable information was not always exchanged efficiently, making it far more difficult to build a complete picture of the killer's movements. Leading much of the investigation was Chief Inspector Frederick Aberline, an experienced detective who knew Whitechapel better than most of his colleagues. Having spent years working in the East End, Aberline understood the district's streets, its residents, and the challenges of policing one of London's poorest neighborhoods. He relentlessly pursued witnesses, organized searches, and personally interviewed many of the people connected to the murders. But despite his experience and determination, he faced a problem no detective of his era could solve. Victorian policing simply lacked the scientific tools that modern investigators now take for granted. Today, a single fingerprint or microscopic trace of DNA can identify a suspect within hours. In 1888, none of that existed. Fingerprinting had not yet become standard police practice. Forensic pathology was still in its infancy, and DNA science would remain unknown for another century. Crime scenes were rarely preserved. Curious crowds gathered around the bodies before investigators arrived. Reporters walked freely through murder sites, eager for sensational details, while officers themselves unknowingly disturbed potential evidence during their examinations. By modern standards, almost every crime scene would be considered hopelessly contaminated. The police relied almost entirely on visual observations, handwritten notes, crude sketches, and basic post-mortem examinations. If the killer left behind physical evidence, investigators simply had no reliable way of recognizing or analyzing it. With forensic science offering few answers, detectives turned instead to the people of Whitechapel. Witness testimony quickly became the foundation of the investigation, but even this proved deeply unreliable. Most of the murders occurred during the early hours of the morning, beneath dim gas lamps that barely illuminated the streets. Few people saw the killer clearly. Those who believed they had seen a suspicious man offered descriptions that often contradicted one another. Some described a well-dressed gentleman. Others recalled a rough-looking laborer. Heights, ages, clothing, facial features, and accents varied so dramatically that investigators struggled to determine whether witnesses had even seen the same individual.